Now we start recording.
I just lost my list.
Greetings, welcome. This is Lansing Online News Radio. This is Bonnie Bucqueroux. You're listening to LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. I'm about to be joined by my co-host, Bill Castanier. He and I have been glued to the TV all day watching the incoming Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast.
It was something, I know someone wasn't trying to be funny because they programmed this too far in advance, but our lead-in song was a surf song by Dick Dale.
Was it really? Oh,
Strange.
no, that is a strange choice.
Unless somebody's really clever.
Maybe somebody had a sense of humor at the last minute.
Whoa.
Just as I was leaving home tonight, Governor Chris Christie was on the air, and he was furious. He's furious in particular with the mayor of Atlantic City, who had urged people to shelter in place rather than to evacuate. And now one of their evacuation shelters is already underwater, and he was bitter. I mean, Chris Christie is not exactly the kindest, gentlest guy on the face of the planet to begin with, but he's just infuriated that any public official would have taken that kind of risk.
He should be.
Oh, absolutely.
So should the people. I mean, they're saying that maybe 30-40% of the people in New York that should be leaving aren't.
Zone
A lot of them
A.
are because they're poor, but still, this could be a tremendous storm. It is a tremendous storm. It could have tremendous damage and flooding.
The real question becomes, it's going to be 24 to 48 hours before we know how much damage, simply because how long the storm sits in parks will have a lot to do with how much the storm surge converges. Right now, what the big concern is that Long Island Sound and then the New York River, the Hudson River, are about to become one large body of water that has no place to go other than to flood Manhattan. And one of the things that's so frightening about Manhattan is that during the day, in a normal work day, for example, there are so many people in Manhattan that if they all went to ground level at the same time, there's not enough room for them to stand. That's literally how many people jam onto Manhattan. As of tonight, all of the bridges and tunnels are going to be closed, so it's going to be a closed loop. You are not going to be able to get onto or off of the island. And that has to seem creepy. It actually has to seem frightening.
Of that size, right? It's not a small little offshore island.
No. What happens if the power goes down?
They're going to shut it down a little bit.
Well, they may not shut it down, but it'll go down.
To avoid saltwater damage.
Well, it could. It could.
On the way in, I heard them starting to talk about that. They might have to shut it down to avoid the damage.
They're very concerned about what will happen if salt water gets into the subway system. It simply could be weeks before they could get the system up and functioning again. And I just don't have any idea. How does New York, what the crippling financial cost of this is just going to be staggering. Originally, I saw an estimate of $1 billion. Then I saw an estimate of $18 billion. Tonight on BusinessInsider.com, I checked, and it's up to $45 billion. And what really disturbs me about this? If you read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, which is EAARTH, because he argues that we've already changed the Earth we live on. It's not the planet that you and I grew up on. That with this kind of problem,
I was going to have Karen close the door.
Okay. With the problem with Earth right now is that, as he's arguing, is that these kinds of losses aren't just money out of pocket now for taxpayers. What the real problem is going to be is that commercial and homestead insurers are simply going to be unable to absorb these kinds of losses very often. There's going to be so many losses as we see these unique weather events that cause all kinds of chaos in our country that it makes the financial system in our country unstable. Ultimately, what will happen, I believe, is that we'll see it revert to the government having to backstop the insurance companies as they do now for flood damage, because insurers don't want to pick up flood damage because it's simply not a profitable line of insurance for them, so they leave the government as the insurer of last resort. If they have to insure my home, and if they have to insure businesses because of extreme weather events, the question becomes how long before they bankrupt the government. Then we don't have a business system that's sustainable, and capitalism collapses, because without insurance you can't run a capital system. So this is a frightening era.
Plus it divides the country. For example, in Michigan we don't have that much severe weather, comparable to what goes on around the rest of the shoreline.
When you look at tornado supercells, I'm not sure that's going to remain true.
They don't really come here though yet.
Well, yeah.
Yet. As I said, yet.
Yes.
The other thing that people thought about.
We have to worry about drought.
What will it do to the presidential election? Early voting?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, in the long run, the question becomes to whose advantage is it?
Exactly.
And I'm not sure that's easily determined. It depends, first of all, what happens, and can Obama deploy FEMA forces well enough to be able to give people the relief they need? I mean, bad as Katrina was, it was in warm weather. It's much worse when you're talking about snow falling on top. That's going to be an extreme problem. This is just a disaster of monumental proportions.
And they've been careful not to use perfect storm.
Well,
They did early on, and
yeah.
then they dropped it. But it is quite a perfect storm.
Well,
It's a full moon.
the nor'easter,
High tide.
yeah, full moon, high tide, a nor'easter combining with a hurricane. You can't get any worse than that. And the timing, it's sped up a little. It's going to actually hit earlier this evening than they had expected, but that's only the beginning. There's going to be 48 hours worth of getting pounded.
So New York will be closed tomorrow again. The stock
Yeah.
market for sure will be closed. I can't see them out there.
Yeah.
So a lot
But
of loss.
of course, what happened was we went through 3 presidential debates without a question on global warming, climate change, right? Candy Crowley threw out the only question from the town haller who wanted to ask the question, saying, well, she didn't want to pander to those people. And I wonder who those people are. To me, those people are the people who happen to live on the planet that might give a damn. I get a little bitter about this because I've been involved in this issue for a long time, going out to high schools talking about it. Went down and studied with Al Gore with the Climate Project, and to see this problem being ignored for so long. We were talking earlier this evening. We'll be joined here by Diane Byram, who's representing the Sierra Club. We're looking at proposal number 3 to talk about renewable energy for the state of Michigan. Clearly, this is a shift we should have already been making back when President Carter in the 70s warned us that fossil fuels were a sort of zero-sum game and we had to get smarter about using renewable sources. Diane, do you think Michigan's on the brink of making this a commitment?
Well, I hope so. And that's really what the question is all about, Bonnie, on the November 6th election proposal 3. It is about renewable energy. It's about Michigan's energy renewable future. And are we going to embrace the future, or are we going to rely on the technologies of the last century? This world is changing very, very rapidly. And if Michigan is going to lead and use our manufacturing prowess, our know-how, our expertise, our infrastructure, we have so much to offer the nation and the world. But we need to first embrace renewable energy. You do that by setting a standard and saying this is our goal, and we are going to marshal our public policy behind a renewable energy future for Michigan by having 25% renewable energy by the year 2025.
So it's 25 and 25. So
Yes.
That's the goal. Current levels of renewable energy use in the state come in at less than 2%, I understand.
I think it's closer to 4.
Is it 4?
But it was virtually 0 in 2008. Consumers Energy had a little bit with some of their hydro and a little bit of biomass. DTE Energy had none.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2008, Michigan virtually was at less than 1% renewable energy. The legislature, as part of allowing the utilities to become a monopoly again, said you need to have 10% renewable energy by 2015. The Public Service Commission has been monitoring their progress, and in fact, it has been stellar. They are going to reach the 10% ahead of 2015. They'll have their contracts committed by the end of next year. It has gone extremely smoothly. And
what are they relying on?
They're relying on predominantly wind, but not entirely. There is some biomass, biodigesters, some community digester projects, landfill gas. Predominantly wind right now, a little bit of solar, but we believe when you get out about 2017, solar is going to come on in a very big way. It's dropping in price very rapidly right now, and that it will be more deployable and much more affordable about 2017. But in the early years, it's going to be predominantly wind.
Here's one of the reasons I have difficulty trusting the power companies. I put geothermal in at my house. It cost me $18,000 to put in a 750-foot closed-loop system in order to be able to use the natural cooling and warming of the underground soil itself to be able to take care of my home. And it was based on the idea of the electric rates. There was a special rate for that at the time. 2 years later, because of changes where the power companies were able to lobby and get the opportunity to change rates first and justify later, as opposed to the old days where they had to come to the commission first. They changed all the rates, and they really caused people like me an enormous problem. My energy bills doubled within a year. So I made the commitment to try. I mean, putting in geothermal is, they say, the equivalent of taking two cars off the road forever, and that's one of the reasons that I did it. But then to find myself penalized for having done this because the power companies don't care really is upsetting. That's why I think a lot of people are worried that unless we can hold the power companies accountable as part of this process, I'm nervous about the strategies that they might use. How will we be able to ensure the power companies are held accountable?
Well, first of all, that filing the rate and being able to use it and then true it up later, that was part of the 2008 energy law that they got passed. And
Yes.
that's part of why they're fighting this so hard. They don't want that law opened up until it has to be opened up by 2015. They not only took everything out of the kitchen cupboards, but they took the cupboards too.
Yes, they did.
So how can they be made accountable? Currently in Michigan's Energy Act, the utilities, to achieve their 10% by 2015, they're accountable back to the Public Service Commission. So the ultimate responsibility would be the legislature grants the Public Service Commission that authority. Should that not work, then the people have the ability to go to court with a class action lawsuit to demand that they achieve their 25% by 2025. But what we believe is there is a framework currently, and it's called Public Act 295 of 2008. That is the Renewable Energy Law. It was a series of 4 or 5 bills. One of them was energy efficiency, and it was the rewrite of the energy law. And Public Act 295 is the framework by which the renewable energy standard is implemented today. And it would also be the body of law that would implement the 25% by 2025. So we have a framework, we have a plan. And the implementation does rest with the legislative body, the state legislature. And it can be easily achievable. And there's been a lot of flack back and forth by a constitutional amendment. And as I discussed earlier with you, the one common denominator on 5 of these 6 proposals is they call for a constitutional amendment. All different issues, all different backgrounds and reasonings and supporters and everything else. But because there was a common denominator of constitutional amendment, the opposition of all 5 of these have kind of banded together to put fear in people's minds, confusion and doubt that somehow Michigan's Constitution is sacred and it is held on a pedestal like the U.S. Constitution. Well, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Michigan's Constitution has been amended 31 times. Every 16 years we have a question on our ballot. Should we get rid of our Constitution and start over and rewrite it from page 1 on? And we have such things as the drinking age. The legal drinking age is a constitutional amendment. Stem cell research is a constitutional amendment. So this is nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, our Constitution says the power is inherent with the people, and the people have the ability to express their will through constitutional means, either by a referendum, which is what Proposal 1 is, by an initiative law, or by constitutional amendment. So the people are exercising their right because the legislature has failed to act.
That is a big issue, and I know that has been, what we saw in Wisconsin, for example, was that people didn't recall the governor there, even though they may have wanted to, just because they felt that was somehow playing fast and loose with the rules. So reducing the argument here to, well, should we play with the Constitution, seems to be gaining some traction. But you're outspent, I would think, by an enormous amount. How do you get that word out?
The utilities have managed on the hard money side that they have to report they're at $25 million. That doesn't count their letters to shareholders. I'm sure every one of your listeners saw that little insert in their monthly utility bill that said vote no on the proposal from the utilities.
And that's legal.
That's legal.
See, I was like, really?
It's expressing their freedom of speech.
Oh, corporate speech.
Yes, corporate speech.
So they're able to do that and deploying all of their employees to virtually blanket the state of Michigan and cover every little Kiwanis, Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, Township Board meeting, you name it. They have deployed their personnel to every nook and cranny of the state, and that's money that we don't see.
You told me what they spent for their ads on the
$25 million.
But on the World Series.
Oh, it's $60,000 a 30-second spot, and they had several.
That just seems stunning to me. I mean, it makes you wonder how much they assume they are saving by investing this. I mean, this is clearly, if they can spend $25 million, it must mean that they assume a lot more is at risk.
Well, they're doubling down because from their vantage point, what is at risk is not only opening up the Energy Act,
Mhm.
but their world as they know it. And we have a monopoly in Michigan for our utilities. They like to let you believe they're a free market, and if renewables were so popular with the
Right.
citizens, the market would drive them to those decisions. That couldn't be further from the truth. They're not a free market. Otherwise, if this was a free market situation, we wouldn't be having this conversation because we would have more renewables because that's what the public wants. But it's not. It's a monopoly.
When you look at how oil and gas and coal are subsidized, I wonder what kind of free market they're talking about.
Right.
Diane, you were not only a participant, but now you've been an observer also for a while. Do you think what we're watching, especially in Michigan, the election and how much money is being spent on various issues and candidates, does this disturb you?
Well, it does disturb me. I don't think it's going to change in the near term because what you have right now with the legislature is not only because of term limits, are they churning very rapidly and they don't have the breadth and depth of experience. They're not there long enough to look long term.
Right.
And it is harder and harder to penetrate the legislative body with information that isn't from a controlled source or isn't from special interest, a lobbying corps, or their leadership. And so when you get that kind of a dynamic, you're going to get more questions put on the ballot expressing the people's will because that's really their only avenue. And to exacerbate that situation, when you have one party in control of all three branches, you even further dilute the public's ability to speak and to have their voices heard.
And we also have them in control of the Attorney General's office and the Supreme Court, just sort of
and the Secretary of State, because decisions are made literally behind closed doors. They're made in caucus rooms, and the caucus rooms are not open to the press. They're not open to the public, and so information is exchanged, votes are counted, deals are cut, but they're not cut in the public view. And so this is the public's opportunity, and the stakes couldn't be greater here, because this is really about, are we going to have a renewable energy future or are we not? Are we going to be embracing the future or are we going to be stuck in the technology of the last century? Now we know the utilities are going to be investing in new generation before this current Energy Act expires. Consumers Energy has already filed plans with the Public Service Commission to build new generation. So that's not a hypothetical. That is based on a filing. We know that DTE Energy is going to do the same. They're just waiting till after the election to show their hand.
Yeah.
Michigan has the oldest coal-fired power plants in the nation. We rely, 60% of our electricity comes from coal. 100% of that coal is imported into Michigan because we don't have any coal in our state. We don't produce coal. And, that's up to a surprise of a lot of people. They think we have mines in the UP. They must be coal mines, but they're not. And so our coal comes from Pennsylvania and Wyoming, West Virginia. It's all transported into Michigan. And the bulk of the cost of getting that coal to the generation power plant is transportation costs. It's diesel fuel because it's brought in here by rail car. And we all know what's going on with the cost of diesel fuel, transportation fuels in general. They're skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. Just over the summer months, the two Michigan incumbent utilities, Consumers and DTE Energy, have increased their rates more than what the entire cost of this proposal is over the 13 years.
So this is just amazing to me. You're listening to LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7. We're talking with Diane Byram about proposal number 3. One of my concerns is that we are so dependent on coal here, and it is indeed, there is no such thing as clean coal. We're talking about a very dirty power source. We're seeing we still have a coal-fired plant at Michigan State University, despite student efforts to try to get that removed more quickly. One of my concerns about the new bill, and I think it's a cause for continued vigilance, if it passes, I don't think that's going to be the end-all, be-all of all of our problems, because as a woman in the UP raised an issue, one of the concerns is that by including biofuels, one of the challenges is it would be very easy to just say let's all substitute wood stoves or corn pellet stoves or some sort of, ethanol-based power generation. We have to be very careful if this passes that we have to stay vigilant because there is this huge oil and gas lobby and a huge agricultural lobby that's using, eager to use things that should actually be going into foodstuffs.
That is something that you do need to be vigilant about, but I don't think it is something that you should lay awake at night worrying about because of the cost efficiencies of biomass. When we're talking about woody biomass, it would be wood residue, and there's a lot involved in that in terms of how do you collect it and how do you transport it for the use for electricity. So that's not going to be a dominant source for electricity. It is going to be wind in the near term, and it is going to be solar. A little bit of biomass as it relates to biodigesters, particularly community digesters. That's what Fremont, Michigan, the home of Gerber Baby Foods, they just had a groundbreaking a couple of weeks ago where they're taking the sewage from the city and the food waste from the Gerber Baby Foods plant, and they're using it to make electricity to power the city.
That would be a great solution. The concern would be that if the lumber industry wants to start using that as wood digesters, then that's a whole different ballgame. So we have to be very careful that we don't substitute one. I look at power companies. I remember the old days when Irv Raven, the late Irv Raven from the Detroit Energy Corporation, DTE now, told me when I was working with a group of farmers and we were taking a tour of Michigan. We went down to the coal-fired plant in Monroe, Michigan, and if you haven't seen it, it's spectacular to see these coal cars coming in and pouring those, just the entire car onto these huge heaps of coal. And he was explaining that there was a time when the EPA first began to regulate the industry and they were concerned about the amount of emissions coming out of the stacks, that they passed new regulations about how much sulfur you could have, for example, coming out of those coal-fired stacks. And sometimes the devil's in the details because the EPA was able to get the laws passed, but implementing them at the agency level meant that the power companies lobbied very heavily to say, well, how are you going to measure that? Are you going to measure that at the top of the stack? Well, why don't we measure it a mile away so we can see whether they're really going to be a problem and if the sulfur is going to be a problem? What that really meant was they had a plan, which they implemented immediately after they got that rule change, was they simply built higher stacks. And so they pumped the sulfur so high into the air that it went to Canada and caused acid rain in the lakes up there. So, I mean, part of the challenge with some of this sort of legislation is that the power companies always seem a step ahead in trying to find a way around these.
Well,
So we
being
always
diligent,
have to. Yeah,
I wouldn't disagree with you at all about that, but you have to start someplace.
absolutely.
And this is a good positive step forward. And we know 25% is achievable. We know it can be done with current technology. And this is a field that technology is changing rapidly overnight. And this proposal would have a gradual incremental increase from 10% to 25% at about 1.5% a year, which is our current pace, from 0 to 10%. So you would constantly be using new technologies. You wouldn't be locked into a technology. Unlike if the utilities get their way, they're going to lock us in to a new coal-fired power plant, a new natural gas plant, whose lifespan is 60 years into the future. Where with a renewable energy generation, you're talking 20 to 25 years. You don't have a huge footprint. You certainly don't have a contaminated site. You can repurpose that land. And you have a set price contract for 20 or 25 years. Yeah. You don't have the volatility of the natural resource of whether it be natural gas or coal, because the cost of wind is zero once you get the generation bill. So that helps us hedge against price inflation from the cost of natural gas or the cost of coal, which we know is spiking up. We have these huge spikes and dips. It's very unpredictable, and you can't project it out more than a year or two because you can't get long contracts on it. So this has the net effect of helping us rein in the high prices of electricity over the long haul. Gives us some stability in our portfolio. It can be done with current technology, current storage. We don't need any new storage or load balancing technology or anything. It can be integrated onto the grid without any of those worries.
Well, my understanding as well is we will not be competitive compared to other states in the Midwest if we don't make this move, because a number of other states have already made commitments to try to move toward greener energy, and we'll simply fall behind.
30 other states have renewable energy standards at or greater 25% by 2025. Now, the opposition likes to say, but no other state has it in their constitution, and they fail to acknowledge 30 other states have a renewable energy standard similar to what we're talking about, including Ohio, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. Today, Iowa has 27% deployed on their grid. And so,
this
yes.
isn't radical.
No.
Oh,
I mean,
it's
it's
not
not
radical.
even radical.
No, it's
50
not.
would be radical. 25 is pretty doable.
No, the utilities have engaged on a campaign of fear-mongering, doubt, distortion, and just outright misinformation. Their latest one is these jobs are all going to go to China.
Right.
Well, it's ridiculous. Michigan State University did a study on what is the employment impact of this proposal. 74,000 jobs in construction and maintenance. Now, last I checked, you aren't going to construct a wind turbine
Right. It's a little hard to do that
in
over there.
China for wind generation in Michigan.
Yeah.
And if we take advantage of the manufacturing of these parts, and they're huge parts, and so transportation is a big driving issue in terms of cost, they're going to be manufactured in Michigan.
When you see those things going down the highway,
Mm-hmm.
it is unbelievable.
They are.
Oh, they're
amazing.
I mean, you know immediately what that is.
Well, I'd like to engage in a little fear mongering when you see a storm like Sandy coming ashore and you realize these kinds of extreme weather events are going to continue if we don't control greenhouse gases. It seems to me that, the CO2 we're putting in the air today is going to continue to escalate for 50 years. So even if we solve the problem today in terms of the future, we'd still be seeing escalating problems for 50 years. So we have to get a handle on this quickly. It seems to me. Now, how would the law be implemented immediately? Would the legislature, which is currently GOP controlled, be the one? What would they do next to implement and write rules for this?
What they would do next is they would open up Public Act 295 of 2008, and the framework is there. In that law is the 10% by 2015 renewable energy. They would amend that to 25% by 2025.
All right.
There's currently a cost cap in that Energy Act too. It's a per meter per month charge of $3. And this would take that to no more than 1% per year, annual, not cumulative, annual, for the cost of the renewable energy for this new proposal. That would immediately reduce ratepayers' amount for renewable energy, residential ratepayers in the DTE energy territory.
Okay.
Because right now they're at $3. They are literally being taken to the cleaners by DTE. Consumers' Energy's renewable energy, their cap is 52 cents right now.
Would there be any hope that the federal government would be a partner in investing in these new technologies to help states make this transition? Because it seemed to me that it used to be in the past that we also looked to the federal government playing its role.
They may, and that certainly would be encouraged. But what's happening is because the federal government is not acting on a national energy policy, the states have to show the leadership. And this is true in many, many areas. The leadership on renewable energy and energy policy is going to originate in the states. And Michigan has an opportunity to be a leader. And why we put the world on wheels. Why would we not want to power the world too with our engineering capacity, our manufacturing base? We have small manufacturing shops dotted all over the state that used to be the backbone of local communities because they made pieces parts. They can be put back to work again because in a wind turbine there are 8,000 parts. And every one of those parts can be machined and manufactured in Michigan. That's what we're good at. That's what we built a history on. And we can be that for this new emerging sector, for the nation and the world. And Michigan needs to get in the game. And getting in the game is passing Proposal 3.
So what are we seeing? What is the hope? Who is the groups that you have to persuade? What kind of turnout are you looking for?
Well, this is going to come right down to Election Day, and are people going to complete the proposal section of their ballot?
That's a challenge, isn't it?
It is a challenge when you have the 6 ballot proposals, all very, very differently. But we need people to pay attention to Proposal 3. It's actually 12-3 on the ballot because this is 2012. This is the third proposal. And it has to do with renewable energy. So look for Proposal 12-3, renewable energy, knowing that you're going to have an renewable energy standard of 25% by 2025. It has a 1% cost cap so that we guarantee ratepayers that this is a defined cost. It's not open-ended. The most that will be for a residential ratepayer is $1.25 a month. And our cost estimates, according to the Michigan Environmental Council, who did an independent study, that's about 50 cents a month. And it instructs the Michigan legislature to put incentives in place to hire Michigan workers and to source from Michigan manufacturers. That's the proposal.
Do you think you're getting a fair shake from the press?
No, we're not getting a fair shake.
Why is that?
Because, well, a couple of things. One is we're taking on the status quo in the largest special interest in the state of Michigan. Make no doubt about it. Number one. So we're not an insider. We're clearly an outsider, and we're taking on the establishment. So that's one. Number two, because there are so many proposals, it's much easier to say, vote no on all the constitutional amendments and not take the time to really understand them. Now, I am very happy with the courage of Brian Dickerson for why I'm voting yes on Proposal 3.
Yeah.
So, and we got a real favorable shake with NPR.
NPR, is that right? I wasn't aware of that. That's good to hear. Yeah, there's a lot of money against you, arrayed against you, and it's just so difficult to get your message out. Where can people go online and other places to be able to find out these facts? Because when their neighbors start pummeling them,
Sure,
they're going to want to be able to have their facts and figures at their fingertips.
Well, the website on the yes side on Proposal 3 is MIEnergy, MIJobs.com. And you can go there and you can get the 100-word summary of the ballot that you will actually see on your ballot. You can get the proposal in its entirety. It's about 300 words. It's not long.
Okay.
It's very clear and straightforward. You can see who's endorsed. We have 14 labor unions. We have the Michigan Nurses Association. We have academics and scientists from all the major universities in the state of Michigan, over 300 of them. We have over 350 businesses. We have faith leaders. We have youth. We have environmental groups. So it's pretty broad, and who's involved in our coalition.
What's so unusual, surprising to me many times is that it seems fairly easy to get people riled up about the nuclear issue, for example. We have nuclear plants in the state, and the idea of building a new one, I think we'd see a ferocious backlash. But people don't realize the amounts of mercury that coal puts in the air, the health issues that this has for babies in the womb. I mean, we see things like the rising rates of autism. In the last few years, it's gone from one child in 110 to one child in 88. We're seeing these dramatic rises. We don't know what the causes are, but we have this sort of background chemical soup of things that are being put in the air, primarily among them the residues from coal-fired plants.
Right.
And it seems we have to get away from that.
And as I found out in my backyard, across the river,
That's absolutely
they're
right.
still cleaning it up 2 years later.
The coal ash.
The coal ash from
Oh.
Water and Light was
Yeah.
put across the river from us.
Yeah.
Well, we know mercury is a neurotoxin,
Yes.
and it affects the nervous system development in babies. We know that childhood asthma rates are directly connected with coal-fired power plants and the chemicals that are spewed out of those smokestacks. We know that it has significant impacts on mortality, particularly in senior citizens with lung disease and heart disease. So there are very definite health impacts because of coal-fired power plants. And that's why the Michigan Nurses Association was our first endorser. And they said it is the most significant public health issue in decades. And it's because of the health impacts from burning coal for electricity.
I think that's so important for people to know. I mean, we live in a state where we need to phase out these forms of energies that do pose such a threat. I'm so glad that you were able to come here because I think a lot of misinformation, unfortunately, is sort of getting into the hopper here as we get closer and closer to the vote. And so keep us posted.
Okay.
We have Lansing Online News. We'll put links over to your site and make sure that people can find the information that we need. Thanks to Diane Byron for coming this evening and telling us about.
I've spent a lot of time, but you did a very articulate presentation. I think
Thank you.
A lot more people need to hear.
Yeah. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ, here in Lansing, Michigan, 89.7 on the dial. And we're now going to be joined by my friend and former student, Karen Creighton, who is now also a frequent contributor to the State News. She writes an editorial column every 2 weeks. And she's been hitting on a lot of feminist themes throughout the summer, and many of her columns hit on those themes. But she had a particularly provocative column that seems to have brought out every troll in the neighborhood.
let's say troll at MSU. I was disappointed in the reactions.
Karen wrote a
Tell us
column
what it's
about
about first,
misogyny on campus, and
Yeah, I'm not sure I love the word misogyny, which, I mean,
you didn't get to write the headline. On
yeah, which means the hatred of women. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I agree that it's definitely there, but I think it's a little bit misleading. But my point was to talk about sexual harassment on campus, and I mean, it's not just on campus, it's everywhere.
that. Right.
But I mean, I live on campus, I see it a lot more often on campus.
You included some personal experiences about the kind of thing. I mean, this goes
Yeah.
all the way back to the sort of 1950s Mad Men era of catcalls and whistles as you went by, walking by the construction site. It's not that dissimilar to walk across campus nowadays and face some of that same kind of unwanted attention as if you, I mean, you talk about objectification. It doesn't get
Yeah.
much more objectifying than that, does it?
And I think objectification is really hitting the nail on the head. I feel like when you receive these catcalls and different types of harassment, it really, the problem is that you're being looked at as an object. You're not being looked at as a person. And I feel like maybe that's even the point that I didn't address enough in the article is just the feeling that you get when you're treated as an object.
Yeah, there was a commercial that turned that on its head. And I remember it was a very popular commercial where it's a group of women looking at some construction guys out the window and
Yeah.
whistling at them and catcalling.
The problem with something like that, and a lot of the comments I got in the article were from men who said, "Oh, I'd love it if women hit on me all day,
Right.
every day." And
Right.
I mean, you understand that, and I'm sure maybe it'd be great at first, but it's at a certain point, it's just annoying. And I mean, in the same vein, women can't have the same effect on men that a man has on a woman. A woman may feel a little bit less secure and safe in a situation like that. I doubt that a man would feel unsafe if a woman approached him in a certain way.
Men are raped, but men are raped typically by other men.
Yeah.
So the challenge is that women feel there's this spectrum that starts with this kind of unwanted leering of a sort. And it goes all the way toward unwanted touching, all the way toward unwanted sexual acts. And I mean, it's part of a spectrum. I think one of the challenges, I was appalled. There's we were talking, there's almost a cottage industry nowadays of articles out there where people are fighting out this issue in the public forum. There was a woman who was part of the secular community, and she had come out raising many of the same issues you had. And Richard Dawkins, who's highly respected, not only is he the British evolution scientist, but also a leader in the atheist movement, wrote a scathingly nasty public document about her. I mean, and it was really frightening to hear the kinds of things that people are saying. Some of the comments, tell us about some of the comments that you get.
Well, I tried my best not to read a lot of the comments, and I did go in today. I had a friend read them for me for a while. She told me, "Karen, don't read these."
You had them screened?
Yeah, and really, but a lot of them that I read today were actually really positive. I was surprised. But on the negative side, most of the comments, I mean, they focused on a lot of the comments. Really, just they reiterated my point.
They did.
They
made
were
your
very
point for you,
misogynistic. They talked about my appearance, which is something they have. I mean, I read an article that I wrote.
I know.
But
there's a
nonetheless.
tiny little picture of you
Yeah,
at the
I
top.
mean, they're basing it on these stupid things that really have no point.
You must not be
Yeah.
attractive, therefore, because I mean,
Yeah.
after all, a real woman would want these kinds of comments.
Karen, do you think you've been at the university now 4 years?
Yeah.
Is it worse or better?
Oh, it's the same.
Same.
Nothing
Okay.
changed.
No, but it wasn't better 4 years ago.
No.
Okay. I
It's
just
always,
was curious.
Yeah, I mean, in the past 4 years, I'd say it's always been this way.
Okay.
I mean, I used a lot of examples in my article of different catcall and harassment situations, but those weren't the worst ones that I'd written about. I have so many stories.
Well,
Terrible.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
this isn't you alone. This is
No.
other people have
Oh,
the
yeah.
same experience.
I know plenty of women who have had these same experiences. Plenty of women commented and told much more dramatic stories than what I had personally experienced. And thought it was great to hear their stories.
And it took a certain amount of bravery for anybody to comment on your story in a positive way, because then they were attacked. So I mean, it was as if there is a sort of little cabal of guys who were sitting out there and egging each other on to try to be as.
So your
Comment
guess
is
would
fine.
probably be that most of the people that were responding negatively were MSU students also.
Oh, probably. Because, I mean, I was mostly calling out MSU students, which maybe isn't fair because men everywhere do it. But I mean, I'm just most familiar with MSU.
I even included a story from my own youth. I was about 13 years old, and I was in an area I wasn't familiar with a young woman friend of mine, and we were in a park that I had never frequented before, and we were encircled by a number of teenage boys, and the catcalling started. But as the catcalling escalated, I began to get more uncomfortable, and you never know where that line is. We took off running, and fortunately for us, some of the young men started running after us, but their sort of ringleader said, "Hey, come back here, leave them alone." And I often felt that indicated to me that maybe there was a threat because he had to sort of call them back. There's an author who is a famous security person to the stars out in Hollywood, California, named Gavin DeBecker. He wrote a book called Gift of Fear, and he said so often the female rape victims that he talks to really said that they had indicators that, especially in the case of stranger danger, and often even in the case of acquaintance rape, that at a certain point they became uncomfortable. They thought there was something wrong, that this person was crossing lines they shouldn't have, with the kind of comments they were making. But they were raised as women not to embarrass the guy and not to say anything. So they said they stayed longer at the party, or they didn't get up and leave the apartment, and they ended up raped. And he argues. He said if the hair on the back of your neck starts to go up, you feel uncomfortable, get out of there.
Yeah.
He said don't get into the elevator with the guy that seems to be leering at you. You don't want to find out later that you're going to get pawed in the elevator. I mean, it is part of a spectrum.
But the tough thing is to where do you draw the line?
Right.
And that was a question that I actually hadn't really thought much about until I read a lot of the comments, and people, I mean, it was a good point that was made. Where do you draw the line? I talked in the article about men checking me out and how it made me really uncomfortable sometimes. And people said, well, if you don't want people to look at you, don't leave the house. Well, it's not looking at you. It's looking at you in a certain way. I mean, people are going to look at you. I look at people. It happens. But I mean, when someone looks at you in a way...
There's nothing wrong with flirtation.
You know
There's
intention.
A difference between flirtation.
Yeah. When it makes you uncomfortable, I'd say it's crossing a line.
Exactly.
I'm fine with people flirting with me. I mean, I'm sure that I flirt with people, but it's just a certain line you draw, and it's really hard to describe, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Karen, do you think there's anything that can be done institutionally at MSU to help change this? I mean, people, obviously, men are coming in to that institution with these predisposed opinions or ways of doing business, sort of.
Yeah, I think that's tough to say that it should be something institutional at MSU. I feel like I don't really know where it should start. It's something that needs to happen on a societal level.
I do agree, because I think that when you take a look at some of the comments that have been made by people who have the respected office of running, they're in Congress or running for the office in this year's elections, and you see the kinds of things they've said about women, it seems to me that that's indicative of a much deeper problem. It's not just young boys growing up that way. It's sort of endemic within the culture. So how do we deal with this?
Well, look at Mad Men.
Exactly.
To me, I'm incredibly confused about why women like to watch that.
I turned it off in the middle of the first episode. I lived that. I don't want to live it again.
It's not a place you want to be.
No, I thought, the whole point was we were fortunate to be free of that kind of thing, but we're finding out maybe we aren't. I mean, I think that's part of the challenge that women face is that, you take a certain amount of heat when you raise this issue, though, because the argument is, well, it's not that serious.
Yeah.
So somebody just checks you out. It's not like they touched you or anything.
Yeah.
So therefore, somehow you should just laugh this off. Wasn't that sort of the attitude that you got from
That was a lot of it. And I mean, checking out is definitely the lowest on the spectrum of problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes much deeper than that. There's so much. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the challenges that I think we face even when we see it in the classroom, how does are young women called upon and are their views respected as much as the males in the classroom? Who automatically gets the leadership positions? I mean, we sort of self-sort on a lot of these things on gender roles, as anybody does in society. I guess it is an epidemic across the country. There's this whole atmosphere too in this election about the war on women. All of a sudden we're seeing contraception under assault. You've written about these issues as well.
Yeah.
They didn't generate the same kind of heat, though, did
Not
they?
nearly. I had no idea that this article would generate so much negative comments. I was oblivious to that fact, apparently. But as of this afternoon, it has 95 comments, many of which are negative.
Is that the most you've ever received?
Oh yeah, the most before that was 8.
So, I mean, is this within the scope of what you can do? Is write a follow up to that?
Yeah, and
Because
I
this
plan
is an
to.
amazing story,
Mhm.
really. I mean,
It is.
to me, it was. I'm sort of naive in a way because I don't run with a
Mhm.
group of people that do those kind of things. Too old for one. So I mean, but it just it's really
Well,
obscene.
yeah, the comments I got from a lot of young men, I received a lot of positive emails about it, and a lot of young men emailed me and said, I know my friends do this, and I always tell them, that's wrong, don't do it. And it was great to see that a lot of young men do really recognize this. And I know that a lot of men do recognize that this is a problem, and it's good to get that feedback.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Karen Creighton about the recent editorial that she wrote for the State News. It was headlined Misogyny on Campus, though she would rather sort of have a slightly different
It was
headline.
Misogyny breeds fear on
Breeds
campus.
fear on campus, yes, yeah.
Dramatic headline.
Who wrote the headline?
Oh, my editor.
And male, female?
Female.
Ah,
I mean, I think it's catchy. It gets your attention,
okay. All right.
especially.
And
yeah.
she took it serious.
hmm Yeah. I think my editor liked it. I think she agreed with me. I'm not sure. I can't speak for her, but I mean, I think she at least knew that it would get some attention.
Well, one of the things that's interesting as well is that you have had an opportunity to visit Middle Eastern cultures, and
Yeah.
one of the serious interests that you've had, we've talked about this before, is that you wanted to know, you were doing a project and you interviewed Kathy Zaitoun, for example,
Yeah.
on why does she wear the hijab? Why is it that it seems that in Middle Eastern culture, whether it's religion or culture, she seemed to draw a distinction between the two. I see them as somewhat intertwined. It seems that they put the burden on women to
Yeah.
try to dissuade men from making remarks. In other words, the woman is blamed if she doesn't cover her hair. If a little curl of her hair appears outside of the hijab, well, then somehow she was inviting male attention.
Well, and
Do you feel that's
yeah,
a problem, that women are the ones who are somehow being
definitely.
blamed for this?
I'm so glad you brought this up. I have so much to say.
Good.
Well, I was in Morocco for a couple of months, and I'd have to say that the sexual harassment there is exactly the same as at MSU. I mean, it's a little escalated. I've never had men follow me on the streets at MSU, but I'm sure it happens to some people. But I'd say it's really great to compare the Middle East, which is so stereotyped as being so negative towards women, when it's the same as in the U.S. in a lot of places. And I think that's very important to say. In the U.S., the burden is put on women too to cover yourself. There's a lot of slut shaming for what you wear.
Halloween is going to be a perfect example.
Oh God.
Yeah, okay, why does that happen?
I don't know.
I'm a very confused person.
I overheard a conversation the other day where girls were comparing outfits they saw on Facebook, and the difference, she was saying, oh, well, this is slutty, but this is sexy. Well, there's a big difference, I guess. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, yes, the burden is put on women to cover themselves. A lot of people commented on my articles like, well, if you were wearing something revealing, then it's your fault that you were hit on, you were checked out, that you were made to feel uncomfortable. I really don't understand that.
I was thinking today, I did the presentations for the Victims in the Media program, and I was trying to remind students that back in that Madman era, you never heard that it was the woman in the see-through blouse who was hitchhiking who got raped. They always gave you a rundown on what the woman was wearing when she was sexually assaulted. I think we've improved somewhat since then, but I worry that we've only improved our rhetoric, but we may not have improved
I think we're sliding back.
Do you? No, I'm afraid we may.
I think there was an era there in maybe the 80s where we were going uphill. I think it's coming downhill.
Oh, yeah.
From what Karen described.
It's no longer as popular to be identified as a feminist either, I think. I think there is that what's called third wave feminism, where young women believe that the gains have been achieved and that the older generation is just dwelling on the past and nursing grudges, and that we need to move on from that. But unfortunately, I think unless we're vigilant, it seems we do backslide. We're seeing all sorts of things legislatively here in the state of Michigan. You've been looking at some of the legislation that's pending and raising concerns about what it would mean for young women. Do you think young women on campus realize the threat to their reproductive health rights and so forth?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know some do, but I'm not sure that the great majority do understand the issues at hand.
Busy picking out Halloween costumes.
I don't know. I mean,
it's just. I was on campus today, and it's not a very serious place.
Yeah, no, it's not, especially. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with wearing a revealing Halloween costume, but I think you need to also be aware of the issues. I guess. I mean, maybe those aren't related, but I mean, contraception is very important, and I think having that taken away or the ease of accessing contraception is an important issue to be aware of.
And I've been talking with Mary Pollock of the Michigan National Organization for Women, the Michigan Now lobbyist, and one of the concerns that she has is that it's gotten to the point now where nobody talks about abortion. They don't even use the word. In fact, she was very concerned that she is working with some other groups that they want to talk reproductive health rights. They want to sort of mask it with other terms. And unless we, I think, talk honestly about what we're talking about and talking, honestly about those issues, somehow it implies that we're feeling so uncomfortable about it that maybe the other side has a right to then push back. So I think I'm glad that you're writing these editorials. Was it that the state news decided that this was a burning issue on campus, or did you approach them? Or
well, because I write a column every 2 weeks, I have to think of an issue to write about, and I've been having a conversation with some of my male friends at work just about this topic, and I just kind of remembered how important it is and decided to write about it.
You know what I think about is when everyone's hopefully going to go into the workforce, and those men that are doing that are
they're going to be somebody's boss.
Yeah, or they're going to work with a woman.
More like,
they might have a woman boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, think about it. I mean, women are going to be most people's bosses pretty soon.
Well, part of the challenge, I think, if you talk about institutional levers of power that might be available, men in groups have a tendency sometimes to reinforce bad behavior. I think we see it in male sports teams. We see it in fraternities. When men get together in groups, if there isn't some sort of sane voice, very hard to be the guy that stands up and says, "Oh, no, let's not do this."
It's like bullying.
It is
you
like
get
bullying.
A pack mentality.
We need to have the young men that you're talking about, the ones who are allies to women and who understand the problem. We need to give them the tools that they can have to sort of push back and do it in a way that doesn't put them at risk. Because I do think there's a sort of ugly side to this where it's very difficult for males to stand up to their own peers. Maybe we can change some of that dialogue on campus. That's part of what, resident life RAs are supposed to do, and I would think that,
we try to control everything else. I don't know. That's why I was asking about institutionally.
That's true.
They could talk about this at the beginning of the freshman year.
It should be discussed at the very least.
They do have, and they have been pushing programs for freshmen on sexual assault, but I don't think they see this as part of that spectrum.
I'm surprised.
I know. One of the things that makes people so uncomfortable, I guess, is that it is a political issue. When we look at things like domestic violence, for example, we see that there is a correlation in the amounts of domestic violence and sort of what I would call Neanderthal attitudes about women. There is, I suspect, although I'm not as familiar with the research, that might well prove true for sexual assaults as well. Trying to combat those attitudes in the culture is very difficult. Standing up and saying that young boys. I remember reading there was a woman who she was a reporter for a Los Angeles TV station at a time when a rapist named Stinky was operating. And she went after him. He smelled like turpentine, they just said. So she went after him publicly on camera. He stalked her and raped her. He held her at knife point in her apartment in front of her 2-year-old son and repeatedly sexually assaulted her. And she said, I had never had much sympathy for the other women until I myself found myself in that situation and realized that this is part of the spectrum. And she said, the thing that infuriated me the most, because I made it my life's work to go out and talk about what happened to me and try to make change in the culture, was that women in the audience would put up their hands and say, how can we make a change? What should we do? What should we tell our daughters? And she said, no, the question is, what should you tell your sons?
Yeah.
How are fathers raising sons? How are mothers raising sons? How can we change these attitudes among young men? I mean, it just seems the culture must support these attitudes or they wouldn't persist.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think part of the battle, at least at the beginning, is getting the ideas out there.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's related. I had one of my friends ask me, well, if these ways aren't appropriate to approach women, what can I say differently? I mean, he knew they weren't appropriate, but honestly, what is appropriate? And that's again where you draw the line. But it's definitely something that needs to be discussed.
I think you could probably say, hey baby, want to hook up is probably a good place to, to
I'm
start
sure.
drawing some of those lines.
Well,
Can I run with you?
Yeah. I mean, that's where universities, I think, have an important role to play. I mean, if we're going to raise the next generation of men who feel that that they have some support for restraining that behavior and standing up against that behavior, we have to start now.
this is totally different. My experience is probably maybe unique or somewhat unique. But when I went to the same university, I came out a better person than I went in because of the women I met. I mean,
because of the issues that, it's an enlightening
it was
experience.
a different
done
era,
well, isn't
certainly.
it?
I mean,
Yeah.
it was the 60s, so that
Right.
people were feminist, but we also learned a lot from women about how to treat them. I mean,
Well,
they
that was
were pretty
part of-
blunt. I
That
mean,
was
they
part
were
of the
blunt.
campus experience,
Oh,
wasn't
it was, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You learned that, where the lines were.
I remember someone telling me, I probably said girls, I did. And they said, you never go wrong by calling someone a woman. And there's little things like that that
Right.
over time add up
Yeah.
as respect. And I think maybe that era is totally, sounds like it's totally different.
I think it is.
That bothersome. That's bothersome to me.
Well, that was part of the college experience, was learning to learn, you became racially aware and sexually aware and just all sorts of enlightening experiences. There was a fervor on campus that we were going to create this just society where people could be treated as unique individuals with great respect.
I don't think that's gone completely. I mean, I think that's the opportunity is definitely still there on campus. I just feel like what you described, it still is. I think it's different, but I mean, I can't say how specifically because I don't know, but it sounds different to me.
What about the faculty? Do they have a role?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
Maybe they'll have to be the next column. Do we still have too many cases of the male prof leering at the female student, or is that a thing of the past?
I've only had one professor with that issue in my 4 years, and he lost his job, so I don't think it's a big deal anymore.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. That was the common stereotype in the past. I mean, part of it is the sort of stereotyping of women that this is the way to approach them.
And women are the majority on campus now, right?
I think so.
Yes.
So, I mean,
in particular, I mean, I'm amazed the majority definitely in the journalism classes when you say, I mean, we're seeing female-dominated classes. There may be that association between being verbal and writing skills. There is some correlation.
Maybe.
There is some correlation here.
So just for example, again, when I went to school, and it's not those great days, but most 90-some% plus in communication, advertising, journalism were males. You go to graduation now, it's 90% women.
Yeah.
What does that tell you is going to change?
Well, there have been interesting articles written recently about how young men are going to become the ones who are the minority that's going to be, having to re-examine their role in the culture because they've been used to being able to sort of rise to the top just because they were raised, the positions were automatically given to men as opposed to women. And that's not going to be the case anymore, especially as women are moving more and more into the upper echelons. We still are disproportionately, 90% plus of the top CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies are still white males, but things are changing.
That will take a long time to change. The top positions, I think, the CEOs.
What about the disparity in pay? Is that an issue for young women?
I believe so. And I think it'll be more evident to me once I actually enter the workforce after I graduate.
I was interested. I'm not a big Mika Brzezinski fan. She is the co-host of
We've heard that. I know that.
With Joe Scarborough of Morning Joe. But she does talk about the fact that, and she wrote a book to this effect, that part of the challenge is that women need to be trained in being more aggressive in negotiations. That all too often they're quick to undercut themselves because they don't have the same sort of confidence or they're not given the same sort of training as to how it is you go in and fight for a raise.
Oh, I think that's fair to say. I know personally I've accepted a lot of jobs for a lot less than my skills are probably worth.
Yeah.
Taking a lot of unpaid internships and things like that. But I mean, that's part of building up your career in college. That's part of building up your skill level. So I don't know if I'm qualified to say yet.
It's so hard to know. It's so hard to know how aggressive to get about money.
Yeah.
Because part of the work world is likability. It's just we're going to see in this election. Everybody thinks that it's all done on policy. And at the end of the day, it'll probably be a lot of the vote will be on likability. In the world of work, it's they expect women to be more ingratiating and more easy to get along with. So when you start pushing back, then you may be perceived as being less valuable. It's an interesting challenge that women face. I think the sad thing is we all thought a lot of these battles had already been won.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad to think that maybe
well, it's not something you can just win and then let go. You can't forget about it.
That's exactly right.
So I think a university should be more of an enlightened place for that to go on too.
It would be nice to be that
Sure would.
beacon, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, that would be wonderful. I hope you come back often and keep us posted as you write more columns on this. I can't wait to read the follow-up and see if the trolls come out at the same level or
Oh, I
not.
hope they do.
They'll be stalking you. See, I grew up in an era when stalking was not even there wasn't even a word for it. There wasn't a crime. I mean, and the idea that somebody could be harassing you by being nice to you and giving you flowers every day, I mean, that was beyond the pale. That was something that was just perceived as something you couldn't afford to be worried about. So thank you very much. We'll be talking about this issue frequently. This is Lansing Online News Radio with Bonnie Bucqueroux and Bill Castaneer. We'll be back next Monday night at 7 o'clock, as we are on every Monday night. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Good show. Cool.